So let's go ahead and start with some prayers. I'll need to do the screen share. Great. Terrific, got it. Okay, thanks. All right, let's go ahead and recite the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha once, and then we'll go on to do the mandala offering and then the refuge prayer. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. There we go. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. Then refuge we'll do once in English and then twice in the Tibetan as usual. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chanyen gipe sanam gi Dola penchir sangye drupar shok sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyapsu chi daki chanyen gipe sonam gi dola penchir sangye drupar shok. Okay, good. Let's do a short meditation, give ourselves a chance just to focus the mind a bit in the beginning, and then I'll come in and lead you in setting your motivation for tonight. So again, just use the breath as a meditation object, whichever way you prefer to use the breath, and try to keep the mind focused. When the mind wanders, gently guide the mind back to the breath, and I'll come in and lead you in setting motivation shortly. All right, just go ahead and begin the meditation now. So now let's set our motivation for tonight's class, and we can recall these similes, these examples that we've been working with. We won't go through all of them in this meditation, but just recall that in every one of them, there is something that is obscuring, and there is that which is obscured. Such as the first one, when we looked at the form body of a Buddha, this kind of perfect body of a Buddha that is within a withered lotus, sort of discolored, ugly lotus that has lost all of its vitality. And every one of these examples, there's something that keeps us from actualizing and seeing and knowing our deepest potential, our deepest nature. And as we've been studying throughout this entire course, that Buddha nature, the primary one that we're always referring to, the ultimate Buddha nature, is the emptiness of our own minds, the lack of inherent existence of our minds that is the basis upon which all of the transformation can take place. And that transforming mind is the developmental lineage, the developmental Buddha nature that we're working on all the time, every time we turn our minds towards the Dharma. Every time we set our motivation of bodhicitta, all of these things contribute to developing our minds in the direction of complete enlightenment, Buddhahood. But it's the emptiness of our minds that makes this possible. We can see how we have various levels of afflictions and obscurations that are blocking that mind from being fully manifest, even though we can be aware of its presence. Kind of bring it to full fruition does require us to address these obscurations. So we need the right motivation for doing this work. We're not doing this for ourselves alone. Without a doubt, we will benefit when we've actualized our minds into the state of completely enlightened being. We're doing this so that we can then benefit others. We can help them to know their deepest potential and to actualize that state of Buddhahood in their own minds. Help them to see their deepest nature, to know that they too have this hidden treasure within them that is obscured currently but can be revealed in all of its glory. So bring that motivation of bodhicitta that aspires to achieve complete Buddhahood for the sake of all beings. In this way, all of our studies tonight, everything we discuss and hear, talk about, all of this will become the cause for achieving that state and helping all beings to do the same. And you can open your eyes fully, and we'll begin the class. So in the last class, we went through a number of verses that are in the section where they just kind of introduce the similes in a kind of brief manner and just give kind of the general meaning of it. We're not really into the deeper meaning of it in terms of what it represents. Although it's touched on here and there, we haven't really gotten into that part of the text yet. So last week, we didn't quite make it through all of the similes. We had one remaining. So let me go ahead and go back to the text. I think that's the best place to start for tonight. I may have a few things to share in the slides as well, but essentially this is going to get us kind of our heads around what we're back into here in regard to the text. So we see that at the top of the page, this is the outline for this 9th simile, establishing by illustration the adventitious nature of the defilements. This is what this whole section is about of the 9 similes. These defilements are there adventitiously. They don't have any kind of grounding in the mind that would keep them there inherently or in a fixed way. They can be removed. And particularly, we're looking at those defilements that are found in the pure levels. Again, we're going to go through these levels tonight in terms of understanding all the various obscurations and how they're being set out and correlated to the 9 similes. That's the meaning of that which obscures, the obscuration that we are looking at trying to remove. So this is again, the ninth simile that's going to be explained here. Let me just go down to that verse 125. It says there, just as having seen a flawless statue cast in gold inside a clay mold, the gold pure, but the outside in the nature of clay, those who understand this remove the outer contaminants in order to purify the gold therein. So the idea behind a clay mold is that the clay is fairly light and somewhat easy to remove in terms of it's not as coarse or hard. And that's what we get into in regard to this level, this ninth level, removing the subtlest sort of affliction or obscurations that are in the mind. So the gold statue is within this clay. And of course, all we can see is the clay. That's what is obscuring, but the gold statue resides within. So in his commentary, Gyaltsab says, inside a clay mold is a form of the Tathagata made from molten gold with all the features complete. The gold is pure, but the outside is covered with clay. And those who see and understand this remove the outer covering of clay in order to clean the gold. So that if you understand that there's this gold statue hidden under the clay mold, then you break away the clay mold and you clean off any of the residue that's sticking to the statue, and you have the gold in its pure form. It's always been residing there again within that clay mold. It's just a matter of knowing that it's there, and then we can remove it, release it from that. So then we have the meaning in terms of, again, a very general meaning of it, not all the way down to the various meanings of the stains or the obscurations and what is being obscured. But as it says here in verse 126, the first two lines, likewise, seeing that the stains covering the clear light nature are adventitious, and then I'll read the rest of it. Like the clay mantle of the precious gold, sentient beings, through purifying the defilements, attain supreme enlightenment. Sentient beings, through removing the obscurations, achieve that kind of gold state of a Buddha. That is just like the statue that's being removed from the clay. So Gyaltsab's commentary for the first two lines says, seeing that the defilements covering the clear light nature of the mind are adventitious, again, meaning that they're can be removed. They don't have any inherent existence, as well as the fact that they arise through causes and conditions and thereby can be changed. So seeing that, the Buddhas clear away all obscuration from sentient beings who are like sources of great wealth, in that they are the basis for the development of the limitless Buddha qualities. And then they bring them to the attainment of supreme enlightenment. So again, they see that sentient beings have within them this Buddha nature that is the source of great wealth, just like the gold statue, that can relieve all of their suffering, bring them to that state of enlightenment. And the Buddhas do that for them by teaching them the Dharma and so on. Then it says, alternatively, the phrase supreme enlightenment could also be read another way. Who clears away the obscurations? The Buddhas of supreme enlightenment. It's not really worded that way in terms of that final line. Through purifying the defilements, they attain supreme enlightenment. I guess, because of the Tibetan or whatever, you could possibly interpret it as, or the Sanskrit originally, as through purifying the defilements, which is done through those who have supreme enlightenment, the Buddhas who who have that and have all of the ability to help us to achieve that. So again, there's not really a whole lot more to say about that verse yet. Let's go to, went down a little too far, to the summary verse that kind of explains it. So it says at the bottom of the screen there, just as a goldsmith astutely perceives the undefiled, peaceful nature of a shining golden statue, fixed inside a clay mold, and removes the clay from it, so too the omniscient one, knowing the peaceful mind to be like the pure gold, purifies the defilements with the chisel of Dharma teachings. By the way, sorry, I forgot to mention what page that was before. I think it was 184 that we started on in terms of the new, numbers at the bottom of the page. In the PDF file, it's off by a little bit, but nonetheless, that was where we started, page 184 of your text. So again, this is just wrapping it up, saying that this is what happens, like a goldsmith knows that the gold statue is there. They remove the clay from the exterior and it reveals the Buddha statue, which then is the pure gold. That's the riches that we want to find. So too, the Buddha knowing the peaceful mind that is at the core of all beings, that mind that is unafflicted in its nature by the obscurations. It's not damaged by them in any way because they're adventitious. That's like pure gold. And so the Buddha helps us to purify the defilements with the chisel of Dharma teachings. It's kind of a nice, again, poetic way to look at it. The Buddha's kind of chiseling away all of our delusions, afflictions, obscurations, bit by bit, so we can have our full glory of this golden Buddha within us. It says, one skilled in the examination of precious substances would know of the beautiful and pure form made from molten gold existing inside a clay mold and would set about removing that clay. Likewise, the omniscient one knows the natural purity of the mind to be pure like gold. And as one would chisel away at clay to reveal the jewel inside, he removes all obscuration with the chisel of teaching the Dharma of the three vehicles, complete with paths and fruits to remove adventitious defilement. Again, the three vehicles we know very well from our previous studies. It's the two of the Hinayana, the fundamental vehicle, which would be the Here vehicle, Shravakas, and the solitary realizer vehicle, the Pratyeka Buddhas. The third vehicle, of course, is the Bodhisattva vehicle, the Mahayana. And then, of course, teaches the paths to attain those various results of those vehicles and the fruits that are actually attained through practice. So the verses up to this point, he says, Gyaltse says, describe in detail similes of obscuring and obscured phenomena. Again, not really in that great detail. It's just the simile is in great detail, but not the meaning of it yet. We haven't really gotten into the subtler meaning of these similes. In doing so, they teach the following, and this is the thing to be emphasized throughout all of this, that defilements can be removed and are therefore adventitious. The removing of the defilements and then how obscuration is removed. Again, we haven't gone into huge detail on how these defilements are removed, what they are, and so on, but it's at least introducing this idea that they are primarily removed through the Buddha teaching the Dharma, kind of giving us the teachings that will allow us to realize eventually emptiness, the truth of emptiness, the suchness of the mind, the suchness of all phenomena. And by virtue of that, together with, again, the collection of merit, the accumulation of positive potential, we will be able to attain that state. So this is, again, what is being taught here is primarily the adventitious nature of these obscurations. I might point out again, and I mentioned it just a short while ago, that Geshe Jumpel Gyaltsen, I think is his name. He points out that there's two main things that we would say Prasangika, our school of philosophical tenets, the consequence middle way school. We would say two main kind of meanings behind this idea of them being adventitious. One is, again, that they do arise from causes and conditions and can be removed when we change those causes and conditions, if we no longer allow for them to contaminate the mind. But secondly, it is also referring to their lack of any inherent existence, the fact that these defilements are empty of inherent existence. They don't have an inherent existence. If they existed inherently, they would be fixed in our minds, right? We wouldn't be able to address them. We wouldn't be able to reduce them or eventually eliminate them. But because they lack inherent existence, they become subject to whatever other counterforces might arise. So this is kind of, they're both part and parcel of the same conclusion, that therefore they are adventitious, but they are both necessary to understand that there can be a change due to changing the causes and conditions, therefore they can be removed, and they can also be removed because they lack inherent existence, because these two things go hand in hand. Let's go ahead and do the slides for this. Again, I have been sharing the slides that come from the book Fundamental Potential for Enlightenment by Geshe Loden. Again, I'm just going to review that this first 8 slides were in last week's slides as well, but I want to go ahead and share them because we didn't get a chance to look at these last week since we didn't get to this 9th simile, the clay mold. Again, they're being called here by what is obscuring, but there's always something that is obscured. The clay mold, in this case, over the gold Buddha statue. So Geshe Loden says, the way the natural potential transforms into a Buddha's nature body, because again, that's the gist of all of these. The natural potential, which is the emptiness of a sentient being's mind that has defilements with it, that natural potential, the emptiness of the mind, transforms eventually into a Buddha's nature body. The nature body being the emptiness of the Buddha's mind together with the purity of the adventitious state. In other words, natural purity and adventitious purity, often referred to as the twofold purity that is in the state of Buddhahood. We have the first of those, the natural purity, but we lack the second. And that's what, of course, this whole teaching is pointing out, that we can gain that second one because the defilements, the obscurations are all adventitious and can be removed. Okay, so anyway, this is being illustrated by this example as follows. The Tathagata essence or natural Buddha potential is clear light by nature, but is obscured by defilements. The Buddha is able to see these defilements as merely adventitious, right? The Buddha knows that we don't have these inherently within our minds because the Buddha knows the lack of inherent existence of all phenomena. The Buddha, therefore, shows living beings who all have the Buddha potential the methods by which they can remove the adventitious defilements through the practice of such methods as having great love, great compassion, bodhicitta, and so on. These, again, are the method part of the path. And then, of course, we need the wisdom side of the path as well, realizing emptiness and so on. So anyway, through the practice of teaching all these methods, when eventually completely separated from all defilements, a person becomes a superior Buddha, an Arya Buddha, a being who has completely removed all of those defilements. The verse speaks of living beings as resembling jewel mines, and I put in brackets there, or precious gold. Again, different ways of interpreting some of these things, I guess the words even in Tibetan, but we're talking about here a kind of this gold image of a Buddha that could, again, have jewels embedded in it or whatever, but it's something very precious and very rare. It speaks of living beings resembling that. Why? Because they are the source of generating all the limitless qualities of Buddhas. The compassion, love, bodhicitta, generosity, and so on that lead to the attainment of Buddhahood are all practiced in relation to other living beings. So this is kind of giving a little more information about kind of the means by which this gold Buddha within us is revealed, this pure, precious Buddha nature comes to its full fruition in the nature body of a Buddha. It is therefore said that living beings and Buddhas are equally responsible for one's attainment of Buddhahood, because we need other beings to practice so much of the path, but we also need the Buddhas to help us to see our own Buddha potential and to actualize it. So recognizing this, Geshe Loden says, we should have as much respect for living beings as we have for Buddhas. In fact, there's a verse from Master Shantideva's text where he says, we tend to kind of idolize the Buddhas and put all of our confidence in them, but we don't recognize that sentient beings are equally involved in our enlightenment, and we have to hold them with great regard as well. This is just, again, a little bit more of that Mahayana flavor of what we're looking at with these teachings, and the recognition that it's not just purely seeing our Buddha nature, our natural potential, the emptiness of the mind, but rather the accompanying method side of the path, that other wing that we also rely upon in order to attain enlightenment. So Geshe Loden continues, the example of the clay mold illustrates that a Buddha statue made from molten gold can exist within its clay mold without being seen. In order to reveal its existence, one must clean away the clay mold. When this is done, Buddha's form becomes manifest. Right? This is similar to our situation, that we have this sort of as was said in the earlier slide, a sort of store of precious jewels, or this very rich treasure within us that again is being exemplified by this gold Buddha statue that can be revealed if we just know that there's obscurations that are blocking it currently and do our work in removing those, just like removing the clay mold can be done. Okay, so that was all that he had on this. Let me take it off of this for now, and we'll go back to the text and take a look at the next section. The next section kind of adds a little sort of summary to this to some degree, reviewing all of these and putting them together into kind of a couple of verses here. Okay, so there's not a whole lot to this section. I'll go through it fairly quickly. But we see that there's first just this kind of root text that introduces the similes of the obscuring phenomena. What are the things and the examples that we've looked at? Remember that we could talk about this as being 18 similes, though we usually talk about them as being 9 because two things are being paired up. So we have the obscuring phenomena, that which obscures, and then the obscured phenomena, that which is obscured by that factor that is obscuring. Then we're going to go on to look at the mind naturally pure, but with adventitious defilement. This is 2 verses again. The verse 128 gives all 8 of the things that are obscuring in those similes. Within a decaying lotus, a swarm of bees, a husk, filth, earth, the peel of a fruit, tattered robes, a woman's womb, and a clay mold. Then it says for the next one, that which is obscured by each of those respectively. It gives a citation of the verse and what have you. It's not so important. That's again referring, I think, actually to a Sangha's commentary. Anyway, let's go on to verse 129. So again, if we match these up, within a decaying lotus, there is a Buddha. Within a swarm of bees, there is honey. Within a husk, there is a kernel, a grain. Within filth, there is gold. Within the earth, there is treasure. Under the earth, there is treasure. Within the peel of a fruit. Now, here they say a tree. Remember, I talked about this 6th one last week. Remember that the 6th one, let me take it off screen for a moment. The 6th one starts off with something like a mango. And so if you have a mango, again, we know from having eaten mangoes, I think you've all eaten a mango, that it has that very hard seed within it, right? Well, if you let that to sort of rot on the floor of the jungle or whatever, where the mango tree is growing, then eventually what will happen is a sprout will come out of the skin, the peel of the fruit, kind of as that decays and the nutrients in it go into feeding the seed. Eventually the seed will sprout, and the sprout will become a tree. And this represents, again, the various stages of development all the way to Buddhahood, because this 6th one is referring, as we'll see when we get to the meaning of that which is obscured, our developmental potential, our ability to change our minds all the way into Buddhahood. So again, there's different ways that these are referred to. Sometimes it says that that which obscures is the seed and the sprout is what is being obscured. And then we have the fruit, the peel of the fruit, and it's obscuring the seed. And I mean, you can have different ways of talking about it because it's a changing phenomenon. It's not something that's that fixed. So we will see different presentations. Here they went all the way to the tree. So it's not just the peel of the fruit or the mango covering that is covering just the seed, but the seed becomes the sprout, and the sprout becomes a plant, and the plant eventually becomes the tree, and eventually, of course, has more mangoes that it gives rise to. But this is the whole idea behind that particular analogy. So again, that was number 6. Within the peel of a fruit is a tree. Within tattered robes or cloth is a precious statue. That's the 7th one. The 8th one, a woman's womb containing a wheel-turning king. Again, the idea here is this is a sort of poverty-stricken, rather unattractive woman who, from the outside, no one would know that within her womb is this wheel-turning king, this amazing being. And then finally, the 9th one we just looked at, a clay mold. Within that is a golden image, a golden statue. So again, this is just setting those out in very brief format in these 2 verses so that we have, just kind of a encapsulation of these, if you will. All right, let's go ahead and just look at what Geshe Loden says in his slides on this. He says the 9 examples are examined briefly in relation to the way that the obscured Buddha potential is made manifest by removing the obscurations to it. This is considered under 2 main subject headings, the examples of the 9 obscurations and the examples of the 9 obscured objects. Whoops, sorry, what did I do there? Okay. In brief, when 9 obscurations are removed, one attains the nature body, which is free from the obscurations to liberation and the obscurations to omniscience. Remember those 2 levels of obscurations. We're going to be getting into them hopefully tonight with this section that we'll be going to shortly. But again, this is the whole of all of these similes are saying the same thing. When you remove these obscurations, the nature body is attained eventually through seeing one's natural potential, that is the ability to transform into the nature body of a Buddha. For example, when the lotus, bees, husk, filth, the covering ground, the seed within. Again, this one, Geshe Loden talks about the seed being that which obscures, the sort of the obscuration on the outside for number 6. The tattered cloth, the woman's womb, and the clay mold are removed, when they're no longer covering what it is that is kind of precious within them. Then, respectively, a Buddha's body, honey, grain, gold, a wish-fulfilling treasure, a tree, a precious image, a universal king, and an image of the Buddha made from gold become manifest. It's kind of just a very brief way of presenting these, just saying that this is what they represent, is the ability for us to reveal the nature body through the natural potential that we exist within us right now that transforms into the nature body of a Buddha. Not in a way of changing, because again, the emptiness of the mind does not change from our ordinary state into Buddhahood. Now we're going to essentially get into an expansion upon these examples by looking at the individual obscurations and kind of defining them and getting a feeling for them. Again, it's going to be something that we'll go into in much more detail. All right, so let's go back to our text. This is kind of where we're headed with this. This initial part was, again, simply just to introduce to us this whole idea of these 9 similes and how they represent this ability that we have to remove what obscures the natural potential so that it transforms into the nature body of a Buddha. So this is the 3rd outline that we saw in this little section, the mind naturally pure, but with adventitious defilement. This is, again, the whole point of this entire section on the 9 similes, whereas the 10 presentations were about realizing the clear light nature of the mind, its lack of inherent existence. Here we're looking at these defilements and how they lack inherent existence and can be removed because they arise from causes and conditions. So let's look at what 130 says. Just as the afflictions neither exist by way of their own nature, nor are they in the nature of mind, so the realm of sentient beings is not tied to the shell of afflictions. Existing since beginningless time is the nature of the mind, emptiness of true existence. Since beginningless time is the Tathagata essence, free of defilements. So again, our pure Buddha nature is not in any way defiled by these stains that reside there temporarily. We have to say, again, remember that we define the natural potential as suchness, emptiness of our minds with defilement. There is a connection going on there, but it's not inherently connected. What stains the mind is residing in the mind on that temporary basis, not inherently existent itself, and with the ability to be removed from the mind, leaving, of course, the emptiness of the mind, the suchness of the mind that then will become the nature truth body, because it will have its natural purity, which is the emptiness of inherent existence, but also the adventitious purity, the removal of the afflictions so that they, again, will be completely absent from the mind. That's the adventitious purity that is attained upon attaining Buddhahood. So let's look at what Gyaltsab Je says in his commentary on this. Again, this is up to page 186 now that we're on. The coverings of afflictions in the realm of sentient beings do not exist by their own nature, nor are they part of the nature of mind. Therefore, they are unconnected. So he uses this word unconnected, which we have to take to mean not inherently connected. Again, they're connected to the mind in that on a conventional way, we can say we have afflictions in our mind. To deny that we have obscurations in our mind would be, a lie, right? Yeah, that would be ridiculous. We do have delusions in our mind that are connected to our minds, but not connected inherently. In that way, we call them unconnected. The nature of mind in existence since beginningless time is its emptiness of true existence, the Tathagata essence, empty by nature of the defilements. This is said to have existed since beginningless time because the mind has never existed by its own nature, right? We never have had a single moment when the mind existed by way of its own nature, or from its own side, or independently, inherently, intrinsically, truly, all these words that are referring to the same false way of existing that we have believed in since beginningless time, but which has never existed at all. So now this is a nice summary, and this is actually quoting, I assume, because it's bold-faced, that it's quoting a Sangha's commentary. This is kind of giving us a real nice summary of everything that is being shown through these 9 similes, even though we haven't yet gotten to their deeper meaning. To summarize, the similes taught in the Tathagata Essence Sutra, because all of these again come from that sutra of the Buddha, explain that the mind, which has existed without beginning in all realms of sentient beings, is empty by nature, and therefore the afflictions are adventitious, and that this beginningless mind, being empty by nature, is inseparable from the innate development of the qualities of enlightenment. So again, this mind has within it the ability to develop, and that nature of the mind is inseparable from that. That everything is kind of residing there together. The natural potential, the natural Buddha nature, as well as together with the developmental nature. And this is our innate ability to develop the qualities of enlightenment because the mind is empty of inherent existence and because the stains are adventitious. All right. Now we get into this deeper section that Geshe Loden's, that slide I showed you briefly, is kind of introducing us into. We're going to see that there's first kind of a description of the obscurations in terms of really being able to correlate them and understand the various levels of obscurations that are being set out. Let me take it off screen for a moment and talk about these. Again, we've already been introduced to them by virtue of the individual outline headings. Remember, we talked about the first 3 being the dormant states of the 3 poisons of attachment, anger, and ignorance, and so on. Each of these we're going to go into in more detail in just a moment. But I want to kind of talk about this whole idea of these obscurations. It's not to say, even when we start correlating them with individual people or practitioners, it's not to say that those are the only obscurations that they have, because there's repetition within this list. We're simply looking at it from the vantage point of what is the main obstacle that is still being faced by various beings who are in various stages of development. But the idea is that we have all of these obscurations. At least I speak for myself. I have them en masse. I don't have any of them removed in the slightest, right? Because I haven't achieved the direct realization of emptiness, together with the accumulation of merit that creates the causes for that true cessation, for the ability for us to remove those layers of obscuration and be done with them once and for all, which is what a true cessation is. It's a cessation to where that delusion, that obscuration, whatever it is that we are working with, will never occur again. So just keep that in mind, because we're going to be getting different presentations of different layers of obscuration, but some of them are included within others. It's not like they're totally apart from the others, because we all are obscured by the sum of all of these. They all are obscuring our minds, at least in our current state. As we develop our minds, then fewer of them will actually contaminate our minds. let's see. Let me go back to what Geshe Loden's slides say, because I think, again, there's only a few that I need to work with here before we get into it. All right, yeah, let me go ahead. So it says, now the examples are expanded upon from the point of view of the various types of obscurations to be removed. This is the section we're moving into in our text, our commentary. There are 9 categories of defilement which obscure the Buddha potential. Attachment, hatred, and ignorance each obscure it. Again, I should have inserted in there the dormant view of that. The dormant state of that. Dormant means that the seeds are kind of there in a non-manifest way. We all have the seeds of these within our minds, but we're going to line those up with beings in particular who have achieved some measure of separation from these manifest afflictions. But nonetheless, I should have inserted that in there. Maybe I'll do that after and we'll revise the slides. But essentially here we're talking about dormant attachment, hatred, and ignorance. They are set out individually because they do have their own sort of unique continuity that arises into those specific afflictions when they do become manifest. But then they're, in terms of them being a manifestation, or as it's called here, the violent outbursts of these 3 poisons, that is when they do become manifest, and they're not delineated any longer as 3 separate ones, because all 3 of them are just mischief makers. They get us into negative behavior and what have you, or at least behavior that doesn't further our progress towards enlightenment. Okay. So that's the first 4. Again, the dormant states of the 3 poisons are 1 through 3, and then the 4th is the manifest 3 poisons. Then number 5, the latencies of ignorance. This is essentially these imprints or latencies of ignorance that cause this mistaken dualistic appearance. And so again, we're going to talk about those more. This is correlated specifically with the person who is a Hinayana Arhat, foe destroyer, because they've gotten rid of the afflictive obscurations, but they haven't yet touched the knowledge obscurations, the obscurations to omniscience, these latencies of ignorance. Number 6 and 7 are going to be referring specifically to those on the Hinayana path that are still learning. They haven't yet achieved the full state of arhatship. They have the objects of abandonment of their path of seeing, which is a certain level of the obscurations, and then the objects of abandonment of the Hinayana path of meditation. Again, we've talked about these 5 paths. This is the 3rd path, the path of seeing, where there's the initial direct realization into emptiness for the Hinayanist, as well as, again, that happens for the Mahayanists that enter the Bodhisattva path from the beginning. And then the Hinayana path of meditation, the 4th of the 5 paths, where you have a recurring familiarization with the insight into emptiness that removes deeper and deeper layers of obscuration. So those 2 are grouped together as well. So we had the first 4 kind of grouped together because they're all about the 3 poisons. Then we have number 5 standing on its own. Then we have 6 and 7 together because they're correlated with the Hinayana Aryas, those who are practicing that path. It's primarily the beings that have those obstacles. And then number 8 and 9 pertain to the bodhisattvas who are on the grounds, who are removing the obscurations on the grounds. Number 8 is the objects of abandonment of the first 7 of the 10 grounds, what are called often the impure bodhisattva grounds. Impure because it's on those grounds that you still have some residue of the afflictive obscurations, and you are kind of removing them, bit by bit. And of course, you still have the knowledge obscurations as well, but nonetheless, this is what makes them impure, is that you haven't yet removed that. Then number 9 is the objects of abandonment of the remaining 3 of the 10 grounds, what are often referred to as the pure grounds. The 8th, 9th, and 10th grounds are pure because they lack any of the impurities of the afflictive obscurations on the first 7 grounds. And those also obscure the potential. So again, that's getting into verses 131, 133, and we're going to go through those in just a moment when we get into the text again, but this is giving us a little preview. And once more, these 9 obscurations that I just set out are symbolized by the 9 examples: lotus, bees, husk, filth, ground, seed, tattered cloth, womb, and clay mold. Specifically, the examples relate to the meanings as follows. Attachment obscures the Buddha potential as the ugly lotus petals obscure the Buddha statue or form body sitting within. Again, he called it a statue, but in our text it says it's the actual form body of a Buddha that is within that rotting lotus. 2, hatred obscures the Buddha potential as a swarm of bees obscures the honey in their midst. Ignorance obscures the Buddha potential as husk obscures the grain within. Again, now those first three are all the dormant attachment, dormant hatred, and dormant ignorance. Again, I should probably insert those there as well in brackets so we understand that's what's being referred to there. Then number 4, the violent outbursts or the manifestations of the three poisons obscure the Buddha potential just as filth obscures the gold it covers. Okay. These aren't really, rocket science, but we're going through and we'll become more and more familiar with each of these 9. It's just correlating them in terms of which of the similes they are working with. Number 5, the latencies of ignorance obscure the Buddha potential, just as the ground obscures the precious treasure hidden beneath, that 5th simile. Number 6, the objects of abandonment of the Hinayana path of seeing obscure the Buddha potential, just as a seed obscures the potential sprout that is abiding within it. Or again, the peel of the fruit obscures the seed that becomes the sprout, that becomes the tree eventually, and so on. Again, there are different ways of interpreting that simile. 7, the objects of abandonment of the Hinayana path of meditation obscure the Buddha potential, just as the tattered cloth obscures the golden image of the Buddha that is wrapped within. And then number 8, the objects of abandonment of the 7 impure bodhisattva grounds obscure the Buddha potential, just as the poor woman's womb obscures her baby that has the potential to grow to be a universal king. Number 9, the objects of abandonment of the 3 pure bodhisattva grounds obscure the Buddha potential, just as the clay mold obscures the golden image of the Buddha. Remember, we went through that one earlier tonight, and I said clay mold is relatively easy to remove. It's fairly thin. That's because the obscurations that you have at the end there are very subtle, very slight. They just need to be removed through the continued wisdom and insight, as well as the accumulation of merit on those 3 pure grounds. The way these 9 examples, such as the lotus, resemble the 9 obscurations, such as desire, is as follows. And that goes into the individual verses. Let's stop here, because I think it's better. We'll do 134 after we get through these others. Let me just put on screen once more, just to review what we're talking about in terms of these grounds and that. Everyone should still have your little copy of this that you no doubt have somewhere, what are called the 5 Mahayana paths. Again, we're mainly talking about in terms of the bodhisattvas from the path of seeing, which is, again, right about 1/3 of the way through the screen from the left. That's where the first ground begins. You'll see it underneath there, right? The 1st through the 7th grounds take you all the way up to this point here, where again, you are removing all of the afflictive obscurations. Again, there's little notes on this chart in terms of what is being removed there. When you get to H, this point H, you have liberation from samsara, essentially, because you have removed the afflictive obscurations, the obscurations to liberation. Then when you get to the pure grounds and you begin the accumulation of that last great countless eon of merit, you can then use your wisdom, realizing emptiness, to remove over these 3 grounds the cognitive obscurations. All right, and that's these imprints of ignorance, latencies of ignorance that give rise to dualistic appearance, this false appearance of things existing inherently. Now, again, for the Hinayanas, they have something very similar, except, of course, again, they don't abandon everything in quite the same way, because they're not even working on the knowledge obscurations, the cognitive obscurations. They're working on solely the afflictive obscurations. But they go through a similar process. Again, we won't talk about or present a chart that has the Hinayana paths, but it's very similar in terms of the 5 levels and a similar process of realizing emptiness and going on to remove layers of obscuration. So let's look at what Gyaltsab says in terms of the verses that we just looked at, the commentary from Geshe Loden on. First, the division of the obscurations into 9, what he calls here defining characteristics, kind of how we delineate what is the meaning of that obscuration, that which again obscures the Buddha potential. Attachment, anger, ignorance, they're dormant states, they're forceful arising again. So the first three are the dormant states of the three poisons, and then the fourth is their forceful arising. The abandonments of the path of meditation and path of seeing, which again here is not set out as Hinayana, but we see that that's how it's correlated. When we get to the full explanation of these, which I don't know if we'll get quite to tonight, we are going to see that they're presented actually in terms of the Mahayana, but the meaning as it's set out in terms of the analogy is that they refer to the Hinayana paths of meditation and seeing. And they're in kind of reverse order there. Note that in the text, for whatever reason, it was Gomlam and then Tonglam instead of Tonglam and Gomlam, sorry. So we see that the path of seeing actually comes first and then the path of meditation, but that's not the order they're set out here. It's just, I don't know why. I don't know why that's the case. And then finally, those pertaining to the pure and impure grounds. So you'll notice that we did kind of skip over a few things. We skipped over at least one thing, which was the imprints of ignorance. So that isn't, quite specifically mentioned in that line, in that verse, but it's implicit within it that we would have those kind of contained within this, even though it's not being set out, because we're going to see it delineated even in the commentary here. All right. Okay, so let's get into the commentary. The first three are desire, number one, anger, number two, and ignorance, number three, all in their dormant states, which initiate the propelling karma for birth in the two higher realms, and which exist in the continuum of ordinary beings divorced from desire for the desire realm. So it's kind of interesting. They say the two higher realms. What are the two higher realms? Well, when we talk about the three realms of samsara, then it's the desire realm, the form realm, and the formless realm. Let me talk a little bit about these because I think some of you had the fortune to attend, or maybe misfortune to attend, my teachings in exploring Buddhism on the concentrations as part of the module on meditation. What happens essentially is that there are ways of deepening our meditative concentration and making our mind more and more stable and more refined and kind of suppressing a lot of the factors that disturb the mind by practicing these techniques that are actually taught in the Vedic traditions that the Buddha himself as Prince Siddhartha practiced. And these don't lead you in and of themselves to a state of moksha or liberation, but they are the format through which we can develop at least some peacefulness in the mind temporarily so that we can then use the mind in a much more focused and powerful way. So when we first attain calm abiding, many of you have gone through the Lam Rim courses where you're taught the techniques for attaining that. Calm abiding itself is kind of the basis. It is the first form of like a meditative stabilization that can be used to develop the insight into emptiness and so on. But many practitioners go on to develop what are called the four concentrations and the four formless absorptions. This process of going through this is a bit arduous, but it involves, after you've attained that platform of calm abiding, you examine the realm of desire that we are all in as human beings, and you see how coarse it is, and you begin to look at the first level of the four concentrations, what is called the first concentration. You look at the first concentration and you see the peaceful aspects of it, and you separate from the coarseness of the desire realm by examining how peaceful this is in relation to how coarse the mind of the desire realm is. And you go through a whole process. Again, I'm not going to go into all of that tonight, but essentially, I did teach on that rather extensively in that module, and it allows you to develop eventually a very stable mind of the first concentration. Then you look at the second concentration if you choose to go on with this technique of kind of developing these concentrations on the basis of this coarseness and peaceness, which is not the only way to develop them. I'm not going to go into all of that other teaching, but essentially this is what's being primarily referred to here. when we look at this process, you can then begin to examine the peacefulness of the second concentration mind in relation to the coarseness of the first concentration, just as you did the peacefulness of the first in relation to the coarseness of the desire realm. So you eventually, through these steps that you take, all these various deepening of your meditation through analysis and what have you, you attain the second concentration. But there's another layer you can go to, which is the third concentration, by seeing it as more peaceful compared to the coarseness of the second concentration. And you go on to the fourth and so on. Then you can go up to the four formless absorptions, which are even subtler states of mind. And they're based on kind of the observed object at that point. The first is called infinite space, and then infinite consciousness. I think that's the order: infinite consciousness or infinite space. Let me put it on the screen, and then you can check me and see if I'm correct or not. Let me get, sorry, it's going to take me a second here. All right. It's going to be this chart. Okay, limitless space. So I'm sorry, it was, yeah, space, then consciousness, how I said it the first time. All right. So what happens is you then develop up the top of the screen there, limitless space, by seeing how that is coarse compared to the fourth concentration. It's called here fourth absorption, but usually call it the fourth concentration. By the way, these numbers 13 through 17, these are actually realms. And because what happens is when you do develop these consciousnesses, these concentrations and absorptions, you then create the karma to be reborn in certain realms that are correlated with those concentrations and absorptions. For the formless absorptions, what you're doing is you're like thinking of everything as limitless space and how peaceful that is compared to the fourth concentration or fourth absorption. And then you go on to eventually develop that absorption. Then you go on to see infinite consciousness as subtler and more peaceful than limitless space. Then you get to the space of examining nothingness, and then finally get to the peak of psychic existence. And I'll come back to this chart a little bit later when we talk about some of these terms again. Okay, so what does all that mean? When we go back to our text, let's get the text back up on the screen. I should have taken off that. I should have just put the text up. All right, so when we say here, these are, first of all, these dormant states of these afflictions. If you have actually done this separation from the desire realm, and even begun the process of going through separating to some degree from the afflictions of the lower realms through this methodology of seeing the higher states of concentration and absorption as more peaceful, you've made them dormant. They're no longer manifest. As I said, these are the reason why you go through this whole process is so that you have a calmer and more peaceful mind that isn't as disturbed by these factors. So essentially, that is, again, what we'll still get, because they're dormant, they can still initiate some propelling karma for birth in the two higher realms, because we still have some kind of subtle attachment to that particular realm that we then causes us to be manifest into an actual rebirth in those realms. But they add the second point there, and which exist in the continuum of ordinary beings who are divorced from desire for the desire realm. Of course, that's the first level, right? When we get to the first concentration, we have divorced ourselves from the desire for the desire realm, but that carries on for all of the other ones. It's not like it goes away. You have made that desire of the desire realm dormant. And by virtue of that, you've made the anger and ignorance that are correlated with the desire realm dormant. Doesn't mean they can't ever arise. They're just dormant. They're not manifest. Anyway, we'll get into more explanation around these guys, but this is already correlating it with essentially what are the beings of these who have attained some level of separation of desire from the desire realm. If we go back to our chart, and again, I haven't really been working with this chart so much. This is the chart that pertains to the 9 similes. I don't know what's chart number 3 in your packet of charts that you have from the beginning of this course. And essentially, this is looking again, as it says there, in terms of what is obscured by adventitious defilement, how it is having some level of obscuration. So we see again that the first ones, the 2 columns that we went through here, was the initial brief explanation. We're starting to get into the third column there. in terms of that which obscures each of these is, again, the first one, dormant attachment, then the second one is dormant hatred, and then if we go to the third one, we see that it is dormant ignorance, and then finally the fourth one, the manifest outburst of the three poisons. But here we're initially talking about the first three. What do we see in terms of the column, the fourth column there? The persons who possess the obscurations. It says ordinary beings who are divorced from the manifest afflictions of the desire realm. We said desire, but we mean all of the manifest afflictions because you essentially separate from them so that you suppress them when you attain a concentration. But you're still an ordinary being. You haven't done the deeper work of realizing emptiness with any of this. All you've done is suppress the afflictions of the desire realm by attaining a mind of the first concentration. And then you suppress those of the first concentration by attaining the second, and so on. So you continue through that process as far as you wish up that ladder, all the way to the peak of cyclic existence, the fourth formless absorption. But you, at that point, are an ordinary being who has been divorced or separated from the manifest afflictions of the desire realm. But again, it's only temporary. So we're getting into this column here, this fourth column, by what we are discussing in terms of that which obscures, because we want to correlate the particular obscuration, such as this dormant attachment and dormant hatred and so on, with the people who are primarily being the possessors of that. Again, we all have all of these obscurations, but this is highlighted for those beings who've begun a process of kind of suppressing these afflictions, but they're still there in a dormant way. They haven't attained freedom from them at all. And again, we would see the same in regard to the person that's correlated with third simile. And that, again, is dormant ignorance. And it says ordinary beings who are separated from the manifest afflictions of the desire realm. So again, that's what we're looking at and kind of what we're working with in terms of this part of the text. All right, I hope that's clear. Okay, that's the very first three. That says these will be destroyed by the supramundane exalted wisdom, right? Because they can't be destroyed by mundane states, by this ordinary way of achieving these concentrations and absorptions, because they're not destroyed. They are only made non-manifest. They're only made dormant. They have to be destroyed by what we call supramundane exalted wisdom, which is the wisdom realizing emptiness directly, non-conceptually. All right, that is the only way that you're going to be able to get rid of those, because and of course, that's how we get rid of all of our obscurations in the end, is through that exalted wisdom. But it's just mentioning that for those beings, even if you've developed this mundane concentration and absorptions, all you've done is suppress the afflictions. You haven't gotten rid of them. You haven't destroyed them. Number 4. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm going to be going to bed.
Okay. Good night, Mom. Thank you. Just close my door there if you can, so I don't keep you up. No, she didn't do it. Okay. Anyway, let's see. So the fourth, it says there, is the forceful arising of these three poisons, which initiates virtuous and non-virtuous karma, and which create only the desire realm. So who's being talked about there in terms of this fourth one, which again is the manifest form of these three poisons? Well, that's ordinary beings like ourselves, right? It's kind of interesting that they don't talk about that first and then talk about the dormant ones, because those people who develop these concentrations and absorptions are more advanced than just ordinary beings who don't have them, right? We've never, this life at least, we haven't suppressed those unless you've attained the state of actualizing the first concentration or above any of those concentrations or absorptions. Then you would have separated from the desire and the other afflictions of the desire realm. But it's only beings who've done that. Ordinary beings like ourselves, we haven't done that work. So what does it do for us? It creates meritorious and non-meritorious karma, virtuous and non-virtuous karma, that result in our rebirth within the desire realm as various beings, in the human realm, God realm, what have you, for virtuous, and then the states of a hell being, hungry ghost, animal, if it's non-virtuous. All right, and we're getting into a lot of technology with tonight, but it's kind of important to explain each of these well so that we understand them as we go forward when we are correlating them with the analogies, the similes. Okay, that again only creates rebirth in the desire realm, whereas the other ones that we first looked at, the dormant states, do create rebirth in the two higher realms, because those subtle imprints will, from those creating those states of concentration and absorption, ripen into rebirth in those realms. In fact, that's what we often call unmoving or unfluctuating karma, and that they only create the rebirth within the state that you have developed. A first concentration mind develops a first concentration rebirth, and so on. So if we go back to that chart of the realms of samsara, we see that at the very bottom of the screen is the first concentration. Again, I call these first four concentrations rather than absorptions. But these first four, you will take rebirth in a respective realm, either any of the three levels within them. And of course, if you are an Arya being, then you can take rebirth in the Pure Lands. But that's not what we're looking at here in terms of these beings. These beings and the first three that have these, primarily these dormant states of the three poisons, they have yet to do that work of removing them through becoming an Arya being and realizing emptiness. So again, each of these has a realm when you develop that particular concentration, and there's intricacies to where they're born and why they're born there, but there are three different states or existences within the form realm, within each of the levels, the four levels of the form realm. And then for the fourth one, there are the pure lands. Then for the four formless absorptions, you would take rebirth in a formless state, which is a strange way to be reborn, but you don't have a gross form at all, a physical body, and you would take rebirth in those. Okay, so again, that's explaining these first four. So again, the fourth one is only within the desire realm. Let me show you that while I'm at it. That's at the bottom of the chart. That's the desire realm beings. Again, we have within the God realms a number of different striations, and there are, of course, many different types of existences within the others. But the very worst, the last three, hell realms, hungry ghosts, hungry spirit, and animal realms, are what is a result of our non-virtuous karma. And then human realm, demigod realm, and God realm are the results of our virtuous karma. But those are, again, beings like ourselves that haven't separated from any of the afflictions of the desire realm. And so we are forced to take rebirth in the desire realm through either the virtuous or non-virtuous karma we create. Okay, on to number 5. Number 5 exists in the continuum of the arhat and refers to the imprints of ignorance that create non-afflicted karma. Again, the imprints of ignorance are these subtle imprints that we have in our minds from having had ignorance since beginningless time. This is the knowledge obscurations, the obscurations to omniscience. We all have those. Again, that's why I mentioned earlier. It's not to say that these are only the obscurations that Hinayana arhats have, but they are the obscurations that Hinayana arhats still possess, because they haven't touched those. Again, as I pointed out when the arhats go through their 5 paths, they are not even touching the knowledge obscurations. They attain the state of an arhat and they check out of samsara. We talked about this before. And then they are eventually brought back into the Mahayana path to do that deeper work, to actually remove these subtle obscurations, these knowledge obscurations. Okay. So again, these latencies of ignorance give rise to the false appearance of inherent existence, everything seeming to exist from its own side. And then there was another comment here. Let me comment on that. It refers that they create non-afflicted karma, uncontaminated karma. Uncontaminated karma is essentially you still have you're still creating karma, but the karma is unafflicted. And essentially that karma that you have attained through the path that leads you to the state of arhatship, that kind of is your karma that propels you into the state of arhatship and this sort of checking out of samsara. And then you eventually again are brought back in to remove these imprints of ignorance. Okay, 6 and 7 are the abandonments of the path of seeing and the path of meditation. Again, this was set out by Geshe Loden a short while ago when you look at the slides, and this is existing in the continuums of both ordinary beings and Arya practitioners. But as was said earlier, even though that's not delineated quite precisely in the same way, we would correlate these with the Hinayana practitioners. So when we go down on this chart, we see again that number 4 was desire realm. Whoops, sorry. Number 5 are the Hinayana foe destroyers in that 4th column, right? We just talked about them. Number 6 is ordinary beings who have entered the path, and it's delineated here as Hinayana Aryas. And that's more precise because, again, we're talking about the Hinayana path of seeing and path of meditation and what those beings need to remove. So again, objects of abandonment of the Hinayana path of seeing, and then the objects of abandonment of the Hinayana path of meditation. And the beings who have those that are primarily targeting them are ordinary beings to some degree, who have entered the path, meaning that they are on the path of accumulation or path of preparation, which once more are the first 2 paths. We refer to beings on this side of this as ordinary beings. And they're extraordinary in that they're actually on the path, but they're ordinary in that they haven't yet attained the state of an Arya superior. So again, that ordinariness of these practitioners on the Hinayana path, I think we would primarily be referring to these ordinary bodhisattvas of the Hinayana, and then the Arya Arya practitioners of the Hinayana. I think that would be how you'd be more precise in terms of this. All right, so that's number 6 and 7, the continuums of, it says they're ordinary beings and Arya practitioners. Ordinary beings have all of these. They're being included here. I don't recall even seeing why there was a particular reason, but nonetheless, the main people that are being discussed here are the Hinayana Arya practitioners, those who have begun that process of removing these obscurations of the path of seeing and path of meditation. All right, 8 and 9, the last of the 9 categories. These are the defilements that are found on the impure and pure levels of the Bodhisattva, the Mahayana path. These 9 are not differentiated by being different entities, but by having different defining characteristics. So again, you would include, if we talk about that which is found on the impure grounds, going back to our chart, right? The impure grounds are from G here all the way through H. So these are also everything that is abandoned by the Hinayana Arhats, right, on their path of seeing and path of meditation. But they stop here, of course, and they go into their path of no more learning, and they don't abandon the last 3, what is abandoned on the last 3 grounds, the pure grounds. But essentially, we can say that there's overlap on this. So we go back to our text. It was essentially saying, that they're not differentiated by being different entities entirely, because they're referring to obscurations in different presentations, but rather by having different defining characteristics in terms of the layer of obscuration that is most closely tied to these 9 levels, these 9 beings, these 9 situations, if you will, even though some of them are lumped together a little more. Essentially, we could say there's 4 main situations. If we go back to our chart, we see that the first situation is that of those beings who have separated from the levels of afflictions of the desire realm. Then we have number 4, which is we're going to include in there ordinary beings of the desire realm. So the first 4 are all included together because they're all ordinary beings. Then we have number 5, which is the Hinayana foe destroyers. They're going to be set out separately because they've achieved a pretty high level of realization. And then the practitioners of the Hinayana, get to those 2 on the next page. Those practitioners who are Aryas of the Hinayana path, that's number 6 and 7. We're going to put them together, lump them together, and then 8 and 9, these Mahayana Aryas on the impure and pure grounds. They're going to be lumped together. Sorry, I'm kind of jumping around a little bit, but I'm trying to give you an introduction to things that are coming up as we go through this. So the first 4 get lumped together eventually, then number 5, then 6 and 7 get lumped, and 8 and 9 get lumped together because they have similar audiences, if you will, who are primarily trying to remove those obscurations or blocked by those obscurations from seeing their natural potential. All right, let's go to, whoops, sorry, how did I do that? Okay. The 3 poisons in dormant states towards the top of the screen there. do not refer only to the seeds of these afflictions, but also include certain manifest afflictions that create the higher realms, because they do become manifest again, particularly at the time of death when you are propelled into those existences from the form and formless realm. The anger that creates the higher realms, however, is not manifest anger, because manifest anger cannot be a creating and throwing affliction for the higher realms. That's because anger does not exist in those realms in a manifest way. It's kind of interesting. In the desire realm, we see anger all over the place, right? In the human realm, we certainly see it in the world around us, right? But the idea is that when you get to these form and formless realms, you actually have suppressed anger, and a manifestation in those realms is always without anger. There's no anger if you're reborn in the form realm or the formless realm. It's not one of the delusions that exists there. So it's only in a dormant state there. Whereas there can be a subtle form of attachment that arises at the end of a life that propels you into another existence in the form or formless realm. And those of you who study the 12 links know that there's always some measure of like craving and grasping, some form of desire that ripens at the end of our life that causes us to bring that seed of karma that we have for the next life, bring it to fruition and propel us into our next existence. I think I've gotten really fuzzy here by going back and forth on, sorry. What happens when I toggle back and forth a lot is that it does that on my camera. I'm not really sure why. Let's see. Let's go back to the text for a bit. Oh, we've got a question. Let's go ahead and take a question first. Yeah, Sean.
This is probably an easy one, but on the chart
Mhm.
between 1 and 2 and 3, it said the person was separate versus, or divorced versus separate.
No,
Are those the same?
they're the same. I
Okay.
noticed that too. And in our text, I think it says divorced. Yeah, at the top of page 187, it says ordinary beings divorced from desire for the desire realm, but separated and divorced have the same meaning. I'm not sure. It was just an error in putting the text together, I'm sure, that chart. Okay. Okay, let's carry on for a little bit longer. I know this is like a lot of conceptual stuff that we're working with here, but I want to at least get through this initial section. And then even with the discussion questions tonight, I already giving you a little bit to work with, but we haven't really even gotten into kind of the depth of all this, because I knew tonight was going to be like this, a lot of explanations of stuff. So now we have the illustration. So again, we go back to the outline headings, we see that the previous one on the previous page had first the divisions of the obscurations into 9 defining characteristics, right? Whoops, I'm sorry, I'm going the wrong way. And then we had the second one, the illustration of the obscuration by simile. So here in this whole thing, we're looking at the obscurations and how those obscurations are correlated within the simile in terms of that which obscures. So here again, that they are well illustrated by the 9 similes of the covering of a lotus and so forth. But well, let me stop there. Then we read Gyaltsabje's commentary on just those 2 lines. He says the 9 defilements that we just went through, obscuring the basic element, are well taught by similes, such as the covering of the lotus, and are for the purpose of realizing that the defilements are adventitious, right? That's the whole point of these similes, is to say that what is obscuring our Buddha nature, our Buddha potential, is there adventitiously. It's not there inherently or in the nature of the mind. It can be removed. Then it goes on in the next 2 lines to say, but the divisions of the shells of subsidiary afflictions go beyond the limits of division. So we got those 9 divisions of obscurations, right? But if we were to try to divide up all of what obscures our mind, these are just one way of presenting it. That's kind of very succinct. Even though it's 9, it's still quite succinct in terms of looking at various categories of things. We have limitless divisions of what is obscuring our mind. Because we could go down into even like the seeds for some of the other afflictions and secondary afflictions and all of these various things. We've only kind of worked with the 3 poisons in the beginning. Those are 3 of our delusions. There are 6 root delusions that these three are included in, because these are often singled out as the three root poisons or main ones, but there are another three in the presentation in low rig in terms of 6 afflictions that are primary. Then we have 20 that are secondary. We have so many different ways of talking about that. And then within each of these, we can talk about the seeds for all of those various things. It's just saying that this is one way of presenting it, but there's limitless divisions of what obscures our minds because our minds are horribly obscured, unfortunately. So the commentary on this is brief. If these divisions were expanded further, then the number of clear divisions of these covering afflictions would be limitless. We'd never find an end to it. All right, let's see if we can get through a little bit of this kind of commentary, because we're in now the short presentation of the adventitious nature of defilements. So to summarize, these 9 afflictions covering the naturally pure Tathagata basic element are like a lotus covering a form of the Buddha, a swarm of bees covering the honey, and so on. All of these that we've already looked at, in the sense that they are not part of the nature of the mind, but are adventitious and can be removed. Again, another nice succinct statement about what we're looking at here. Then we go into the detailed explanation of the nature of each defilement. And it kind of highlights this section from Sangha's commentary. What are these 9? And it goes all the way up to found on the pure levels, which again is where number 9 is. Those are correlated with the obscurations that the bodhisattvas have on the pure levels. The word forceful can also apply to afflictions that initiate acts such as killing that create the lower realms. Again, that's just delineating a very small comment about that word forceful. Remember, we saw the forceful manifestations or forceful, what was the word that was used? The forceful rising. Again, different ways of talking about that. It's essentially when those become manifest, which can initiate actually acts of killing and so on that do create rebirth in the lower realms. Not a big point, just kind of including it in there for some reason. Let's go into and at least start the definition of each of these. As I said, they're going to be divided into 4 main groups. So this is just a short while ago, but let's go over it real quickly. The 3 poisons that are dormant are the first 3 that we saw. And then the 4th one is when they are manifested, lumped together, all 3 of them. Then we have number 5, the ground of the imprints of ignorance. That's the second grouping. It's set aside separately because it pertains only to the Hinayana Arhats, whereas the first one pertains to ordinary beings. The first 3 of that first one to beings who've separated from the desire realm, but the 4th one was ordinary beings like ourselves that haven't done that work yet. But nonetheless, number 1, this category, this first outline heading is all of the ordinary beings, the primary things that we face, that we have to tackle and deal with. Again, not to say that we don't have everything else, because we do, but that's kind of the schema for this, is to look at what is the most prominent. For the second category, the grounds of the imprints of ignorance, as I said, that's the Hinayana Arhats, because they've removed the afflictive obscurations. But what's keeping them from fully realizing their Buddha potential is that they still have the knowledge obscurations, these imprints of ignorance. Number 3 on our list of 4 here, the path of seeing and path of meditation abandonments. As I said, these are generally set out as the Hinayana paths of seeing and meditation. But this is referring to what they have to, those Hinayana Aryas, what they have to abandon in order to accomplish the state of arhatship. And then number 4, the defilements found in the impure and pure levels. This is numbers 8 and 9, right? The Arya Bodhisattvas, who have to actually abandon these impure and pure level obscurations in order to achieve the path of no more learning, buddhahood. All right, so let's see, we'll just maybe have time to look at the first one, perhaps. I'm not sure we'll even be able to get through that. It's got a little bit to it, but the 3 poisons, dormant and manifest, the first grouping of these first 4 of the 9 obscurations. These and other abandonments can be included in the abandonments of the path of seeing and meditation. But once more, these are divisions made in order to stress that there's a sequence to the abandoning of afflictions in manifest form and seed form, and also to indicate how many abandonments still remain when becoming a Hinayana Arhat. So as I said earlier, just a short while ago, they're set out in this way to emphasize the development that we have and that we have to go through in order to eventually attain the state of Buddhahood. And so, again, it's not to say that we don't have these other obscurations, but that this is initially in terms of ordinary beings. Okay, the next paragraph. On these abandonments, the commentary says, again, this commentary by a Sangha says, afflictions in the continuum of those divorced from worldly desire are the causes of unmoving mental formations, unmoving karma. I mentioned that a short while ago, in the sense that the ripening of that karma brought on by these afflictions cannot be moved or changed to other levels. So again, there's still some subtle level of affliction that they are kind of working with as they go through this process of developing. I got a little, oh, it's better now. Okay. They've gotten some separation from the afflictions of the desire realm by attaining the first concentration. And then they separate from the first concentration to the second and so on. But there's still a subtle level that will cause them to take rebirth in the respective realm, as I showed on that chart. So those who develop the first concentration take rebirth in the first concentration form realm. That's what propels them into that existence. So again, there's still kind of this power of these layers of dormant affliction that will propel one into another rebirth, but it's called unmoving because, again, it only will take you into that particular state that is correlated with the level of concentration or absorption that you've developed. Okay, and again, they can't be changed or moved to other levels. The next sentence, although all manifest afflictions of the realms up to the realm of nothing at all, nothingness, which was our seventh one, again, the third of the formless absorptions, all the way to that realm can be abandoned by the worldly path of coarse and subtle aspects, as I was explaining earlier, the coarseness of the lower level, the peaceness or subtleness of the level you are aspiring to. So again, afflictions categorized as those at the peak of samsara, though, cannot and must be destroyed only by the supermundane exalted wisdom. Their seeds can only be abandoned by Arya paths. So let's go back to this chart again. I know this isn't the ideal chart because it's kind of talking about the realms, but nonetheless, we can use it to kind of ignoring that one little part there that has the realms that are exclusive to Arya beings. What happens is, again, as you go from the first absorption to the second absorption, you have suppressed the afflictions that are related to the first absorption, the attachment to that, and so on. When you go from the second to the third, you've suppressed the ones related to the second, and so on. You get to limitless space. Limitless space suppresses the attachment to the fourth concentration or absorption. Infinite consciousness suppresses that related to limitless space. You get to nothingness. Nothingness can suppress those related to infinite consciousness. When you get to peak of psychic existence, you can develop that on the basis of suppressing the afflictions of nothingness, but there's nothing above the peak of psychic existence to suppress the afflictions of that state, even though it's an extremely subtle state. There's a very subtle form of desire that you aren't able to separate from because there's nothing beyond this. This is as subtle as our realms of concentration get, or states of concentration get. You don't have anything that works in a mundane way to say, oh, I want to attain something more peaceful than that. Well, there is nothing up above that is more peaceful. Instead, to remove those, and of course, to get rid of all of them correlated with these all the way down to the desire realm, you have to use a supramundane path. That's what's being talked about here. Again, many of you have had teachings from me or others on these different levels of concentration and absorptions. But this is the problem. You hit a ceiling. You get up to the peak of cyclic existence. Sometimes that state is actually called with discrimination, not without discrimination, because you don't have any coarse discrimination at all, but you have a very subtle level of discrimination that you can use at that level. But nothing that coarse at all. The state of existence or state of being in that absorption is really very fine. But there's this subtle level of attachment that you can't go anywhere else to suppress it. You have to get rid of it, and of course, eventually get rid of all of these obscurations by a supramundane path, a path of realizing the wisdom of emptiness directly. That's what's being said here. I know we're a little over 8:30, but let's just go through this last little paragraph because I'm going to skip the last paragraph on this. It says here in this third paragraph, the one towards the bottom there, acts of desire and so forth in the continuum of sentient beings are the causes for virtuous and non-virtuous mental formations. We talked about this earlier, right? All the things that we engage in that are based on our desire or other afflictions. This is this fourth one of these four obscurations. This is the one that is, manifest forms of these that cause us to be continually reborn in the desire realm. As it says there, those throw them into the desire realms of gods and men if they are virtuous, and into the lower realms if they are non-virtuous. Okay, that's the end of that. So we went through 1 through 3 because, again, the dormant state of the three poisons is what's still kind of residing there within these beings all the way up to the peak of psychic existence. Those beings who have developed some separation from the desire of the desire realm and so on. And then we have the beings with manifest desire and the other afflictions. And they are the ordinary beings that keep cycling in the desire realm because they have no ability to even be reborn outside of that in the form or formless realm. So then this final sentence in that, it says, or two sentences, it says, the mention of the meditative concentration of the meditation on ugliness that suppresses manifest desire is just an example. Other meditations also, such as on love in order to suppress anger, can be included. These are yoga practices to purify one's behavior. And I'm going to come back and comment on that in just a moment, but know that this last paragraph I'm going to skip because it pertains to teachings from the mind only, the Chittamatran school. I don't think it's really quite as relevant for us to, get deeply into that. Did I get fuzzy or not again? I can never tell on the screen. Okay, so what were we saying there? Essentially, when we're talking about beings who are ordinary beings like us, we can, to some degree, overcome some of our coarse delusions that we have, manifest delusions, through engaging in certain meditations that the Buddha taught. Often the Buddha taught meditation in terms of certain objects that purify one's behavior. By that you might think, well, then it's my actions that I'm doing out in the world, but behavior, we mean your mental landscape. Many of us have particular delusions that are more manifest than others, right? Some people have a nature where they might get angry more often than others. Others might be more jealous. Others might be more desirous, have attachment, and so on. The Buddha taught various meditations that help you to lessen those without having to develop these four concentrations and four formless absorptions. You can reduce them to some degree by meditating on these various things. The one that was mentioned was when you meditate on everything having kind of an ugly appearance. That's the antidote to attachment that only grasps at the pleasure that we see in things, the desirable aspects, and exaggerates them. So in one of them, you see everyone as a skeleton, and you can even go through, there's another meditation where you see bodies as kind of rotting and decaying and going through various states of putridness and what have you. I don't know if that's even a word, but the idea is that there's different ways to counteract attachment if that's your primary delusion. That's these yogas of purifying one's behavior, or to purify and kind of reduce our anger through meditating on love for others and so on. We know some of these. These are kind of more our temporal antidotes that we're taught in Buddhism on the path to kind of lessen these afflictions so they aren't so predominant in our minds. That's all that was being talked about there. Okay, so all we've talked about in terms of getting into the deeper explanation of these is the first four, but we've set out essentially that the first three are all in those beings who have developed some meditative concentration or absorption that has begun the process of sort of separating from those, especially the desire of the desire realm or the afflictions of the desire realm. And they can be anywhere on that continuum through those four concentrations or four absorptions, formless absorptions. And then we have in the fourth one, the ordinary beings who haven't developed those states, who are subject to the kind of forces of the manifest afflictions of desire, or attachment, anger, and ignorance. Wow, it was a lot of words tonight. let's do our discussion. Now, for the discussion, again, I had put together a couple of questions. So I hope I didn't, I may not have put that in here. Did I? Let me see if it's here. No, I'm sorry, I didn't. I put that on, I put it in Word and I forgot to put it into, I've had a lot on my mind these days, sorry. Let me get that up. I think it's in a Word file. Gonna take me just a second here to pull that up. All right. And then I'll just share the Word file. Might not be as tidy as using the PDF. I sometimes put a PDF up there, which gives a little more ability to see it, but I can change the view too, I think. Oops, not that. Page width, there we go. Okay, so the first question that you had, and you're welcome to go back. Last week, we probably didn't get much time to discuss the other similes. Maybe you didn't finish all those, but the idea is to maybe at least discuss the ninth one that we went through at the very beginning and just go over the analogy in sort of terms of the obscured and obscuring phenomena that are within it and the brief meaning of the simile, which again has been set out in our text, not the deeper meaning that we've been getting into. Then in terms of number 2, in regard to the full explanation of the similes in terms of the meaning of that which obscures, the obscurations, please set out and briefly describe the 9 obscurations. And I've done them kind of very briefly. We haven't gone into great detail around them, but how are they related in terms of the 4 classes of persons who are said to predominantly possess them? Again, we have that column on the chart that pertains to them. They're not completely distinct in that we might have two or three within some of them, but nonetheless, we still have kind of 4 main groupings, 4 classes of persons that I just went through. So you have an ability to kind of review a bit of what I did, even though I haven't gone into a full explanation of each of these. All right. Is that enough to work with? All right, I'm going to check out for just a moment, but I'll be kind of joining.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think I came in. You were saying going through the 4 groupings. I think so. That was the first 2.
We were at the 5th level. We talked
Yeah,
up to that point.
the 5th of the 9 and the 2nd of the 4. That in terms of the 4 groupings. Yeah. I mean, again, they're not. And I had a hard time when I put the question together, even because if you look at it, you have a lot of these are all kind of different in terms of what's being said in that column. But we saw them lumped together in terms of the 4 outlines that I just introduced you to it towards the end of class. So anyway, I'll let you carry on. I'll try to be just a fly on the wall.
We can't hear you, Ida.
I'm sorry. I do have a question. Let me see if I find this. One moment, please. On the on the 6th one, a fruit tree within the seed of a tree. It refers to the ordinary beings who have entered the path. Does that mean the Hinayana path or the path, well, the path of preparation? Would that be the path of preparation?
Yeah, I think it would be the paths of accumulation and preparation, because you don't enter the path until you enter the path of accumulation.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yes,
so those 2. Now, whether it's Hinayana or Mahayana, I think that, again, we're going to see when we get to that section, I mentioned this earlier, that they actually explain it from the perspective of the Mahayana, which is kind of strange, but yet it seems to be referring primarily to the Hinayana. So again, even though it says ordinary beings who have entered the path, it seems like it should be Hinayana path and then Hinayana Aryas as well. Because if you look at it, the main things that people, ordinary beings who have entered the path, have to get rid of is the path of seeing obscurations and then the path of meditation. But we'll get to that next week in more detail. So, yes, beings who have entered the path would be anybody, or if they're ordinary beings, it would be anybody who's still on the first two levels, the path of accumulation and path of preparation.
me read the question again. In regard to the full explanation of the similes, in terms of the meaning of that which obscures, please set out and briefly describe the 9 obscurations. How are they related in terms of the 4 classes of persons who are said to predominantly possess them? As well.
So that's 6 and 7, and then 8 and 9 is the Mahayana Aryas
Mhm.
on the impure and pure grounds.
So again, we haven't really gotten into a deeper discussion of each of these, but maybe you could talk about the first 4 because I did go into those, the section pertaining to those, which once more was on page 188 in terms of what's being talked about there as kind of the dormant 3 poisons, and then them in the violent outbursts or forceful manifestations of them. I think, yeah, that's the section.
I did not quite get how the 4 concentrations and 4 absorptions correlate to this. I guess I have to go back to my notes.
Does
yeah.
somebody want to try to talk about that? What is your understanding of why I went through that presentation of the concentrations and absorptions in relation to the first 3? Anyone?
I think it was because the box actually says ordinary beings who are divorced from the manifest afflictions of the desire realms. And those people who are divorced from the manifest afflictions of the desire realms are those who are in those 8 categories.
Right.
And so because, in order to explain what that meant, you had to bring in those 8 categories.
Mhm. Good.
But I
And
don't
plus-
have that. I don't have that nifty chart.
No, I didn't send that out to everyone because, again, it's not. I'm happy to include it. I'll send it to Venerable Dundrup, and he can make sure that it gets out there. But it's just a single page again, and it was set out primarily in terms of these realms that are different realms of existence, not the actual concentrations and absorptions themselves. So they're implicit in there, but as Lou was saying, I mean, in order to, we start off as kind of at the desire realm, and we develop the mind of calm abiding, which is, it's actually said to be a form realm mind, but it's not yet begun the process of separating from desire and the other afflictions of the desire realm and attaining the first concentration, this first level. So you have to go through this very arduous process again of analyzing and seeing that this is much more peaceful and calm and a subtler state of mind than the desire realm. And so you do this huge analysis and eventually separate from the manifest afflictions of the desire realm. So at that point, you've attained that. You're an ordinary being who has separated from the afflictions of the desire realm, exactly what's in that column that Lou read for the first 3. Then you can still go on to the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th concentration in a similar manner of seeing the peacefulness of each layer compared to the one before it. And then you can go to the 4 formless absorptions and do the same thing. And eventually you can, manipulate these and work with them and develop the karma to be reborn in all of them if you wish. But it's always just a mundane result, as was pointed out. Get to the peak of cyclic existence, the fourth level here, and there's no way of separating from that very subtle attachment, because there's no higher realm that you can look to as more peaceful.
So another way,
yeah, go ahead.
I would say another way of looking at it is, it's only category number 4 that applies to the human realm. Those first 3 don't even apply to the human realm.
Well, they would be human beings who have attained those states. So when we say,
I'm sorry, wouldn't they be in one of those? Each one of those states had realms associated with it.
well, you do take rebirth into those realms. If you want, maybe I can share that chart so that we have that in front of us. And then that will at least give us a tool for talking about these. So again, when you attain these states, you'll be a human being who has the first concentration or first absorption. So you will be a human being who has separated from the afflictions of the desire realm when you've attained this at the bottom, the first absorption. And you will carry that forward as you separate from each of these all the way up into the 4 at the top there, the 4 formless absorptions. So again, as you go through these 4, the other 4, you just get separated from subtler and subtler levels of stuff, but you're definitely separated from the afflictions of the desire realm, but you can still be in a human body.
Okay, I guess I guess I didn't understand.
Yeah.
I thought that if you reached an absorption at the moment of death, you'd be reborn into one of these other realms. But so these are also found in the human realm.
These states of mind are cultivated in the human realm, and that's where you actually create the unmoving karma to be reborn in those respective realms, the 4 concentration realms of the form realm, and then the 4 formless realms that are correlated with the 4 formless absorptions. So yeah, your rebirth will no doubt come as a product of that karma. It's again unmoving karma, so it lines up directly. Whatever you create for first concentration only creates a first concentration rebirth. It doesn't create a second or third or fourth or whatever. All of these are that unmoving karma, but they're created while you're a human being in the human realm, doing these concentrations and absorptions.
So once you attain a rebirth in one of those realms, is there a possibility of being reborn back into a human realm?
Absolutely.
That's what I didn't understand.
And that's because you have these dormant afflictions that you've only suppressed. You haven't gotten rid of them. So again, we can talk about ordinary beings that are humans that have cultivated this separation through these techniques, at least getting to the first concentration where they have a separation from the desire realm afflictions. Or we can also talk about the beings that are born into those realms that have temporarily suppressed them so that they live in a realm where those don't even exist. They are dealing with form realm minds and formless realm minds and so on. But that's not a permanent state by any means. The karma to be reborn there, that is this unmoving karma that gets you into that exact realm, it will eventually cease. It will eventually be depleted. And you fall from that state.
I understand it.
Okay.
So are there methods that would allow an ordinary person in meditation to go through almost like a simulated death experience to where they experience these other realms, but then come back to that original body does that make sense?
Yeah, and I don't think that's quite how it's described. I mean, you're simply you are cultivating a mind of that particular form or formless realm. You're not cultivating an actual experience of being reborn there until, as Lou pointed out, you die, and that unmoving karma jettisons you into that particular respective realm of, each of the concentrations or absorptions, depending upon various other factors, but you would end up in that respective one. Again, that's what makes it unmoving karma.
Well, because like I was listening to a podcast where they were discussing experiences from dark retreat,
Mm.
and the guy was talking about how he had in these dark retreats, like you would go through these stages over and over again.
Mm.
Like once like there was a point after a couple of days of being in the dark where the mind just like turns the lights on,
Yeah.
and then you start to go through these stages like over and over again, but you're not like actually like your physical body isn't dying, but
Right.
you may be going through these death experiences over and over again.
Mm.
Um,
I don't know. I've never heard that in relation to this particular teaching, but I don't know. Could
I
be.
mean, that's similar to what was happening in some of these Amazonian ceremonies I did as well. But
Yeah.
I mean, it sounded like the stuff I did in the Amazon sounds exactly like the experience sounds identical to what they
Mm.
were experiencing in Dark Retreat.
Mm. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I can speak to that, Sean. I just have never heard them described in that way. Because, I mean, again, as you go through this process of refining your concentration through these various realms, I'm sure there's an altered perception, if you will, of what it's like to be in there. Because again, that's the whole point when you're kind of going through this process, to see that there's something much more peaceful and subtle about the first concentration compared to a mind of the desire realm. And you keep working with this to get more and more refined. They say bodhisattvas will develop an adeptness with all of these levels and be able to work with them. But the four formless absorptions compared to the four concentrations, these are not so useful in terms of being a platform for developing deeper realizations of emptiness and so on, because the mind gets too subtle. And as I said, the top one is called often without discrimination, not without discrimination, because there's just the subtlest level of discrimination. So they don't become very astute at being able to kind of work with analytical topics, if you will. And so you develop those. So you have a sort of dexterity mentally, but you end up using, often they say the fourth concentration is like the ultimate best platform to use for realizing emptiness. It's got the most stability and has removed. At that point, you only have a feeling of equanimity. You don't have any of the bliss of the other concentrations. So the mind becomes very stable. It's not being agitated even by any sort of feelings of bliss or happiness.
And where can you get like you were mentioning some kind of meditation where you're visualizing all these bodies decomposing and things. Where can you get those meditations?
I mean, they're explained in various texts. Is that what you're talking about, Sean? Or
Yeah.
I mean, I first encountered them in the Abhisamayalankara, the Maitreya's text, Ornament to Clear Realization. Yeah, I'll see if I can find something. I may not be able to do that here at my mom's, but I'll see what I can find on those. And then Shayla put something in the chat box about a darkness retreat, spiritual retreat in a space that is completely absent
That's from Google.
from Google. Yeah. I mean, I've never even heard of a darkness retreat in those texts that I mentioned, like Ornament. It doesn't talk about them so much. Again, it says Tibetan Buddhism and Bon. Bon is the sort of shamanistic tradition that was there prior to Tibetan Buddhism, or prior to Buddhism being introduced into Tibet.
Yeah, I think
don't
it
know.
was super secret because people could go crazy. So, like, if you weren't prepared,
Yeah.
but they're building one up in New York,
Oh,
like a
really?
whole center for it.
For doing dark retreat. That's
Yeah.
interesting. I mean, anyway, we should conclude tonight, but I just wanted to mention that I think that there's a similar thing that happens when you're devoid of any sort of sound, rather than shutting off your visual thing. It was a report on 60 Minutes one time that was really quite interesting. They have these completely soundproof boxes that you can be in that most people will go crazy in, but they've actually brought people who've been in war and are suffering from PTSD and they actually find that to be like comforting to be in a space where there's absolutely no noise, I guess because of all of the kind of noise and eruption of sound that they've dealt with in their trauma, that to be in a quiet space actually can be extremely calming
Yeah,
for them.
there's
But
certain caves that you can get that effect in.
yeah,
There's one here in
anyway,
North Carolina.
yeah, I don't know if that's a similar thing, if they do a silent retreat too, like
Or
more than
sensory
just.
deprivation tanks will do the same thing.
But I think you would always still have some noise. I don't know about light, if you can get everything absolutely 100% dark, but with noise, you've always got the noises of your own breathing and the body, so that you never
Right,
will be completely free of. But anyway, I just thought I'd bring that up. It's kind of interesting how some sort of sensory deprivation can be a tool sometimes to going deeper in the mind. But okay, I'll see if I can find some other stuff on that. Some instruction for you that would be useful. All right, so I will make sure that handout gets to Venerable Dundrup. I'll see if I can find another one. I know there's another one that's out there that kind of was better, but I just didn't have the time today. By the way, thank you all for prayers for my brother. His surgery was successful today. Everything went fine. He's in the ICU, and hopefully we'll be able to talk to him sometime in the next day or two. But everything seemed to go well. All right, let's go ahead and do the dedication prayers. Okay. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. And then we'll make prayers for all of our gurus by reciting this prayer, especially for His Holiness. But through this, may all of our gurus have good health and long lives, and all their wishes be fulfilled. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And then the prayer for Rinpoche's swift return. Peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang, father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wear the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and from other living beings you suddenly departed to peace, what a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. Let's dedicate lastly for any beings we're holding in our hearts who experiencing various sufferings. We send that energy out to them so that they can be free from that suffering, and then also that they might find all the causes that lead to peace and happiness. We can even think about places in the world, especially in Israel, Gaza, where there's just unbelievable strife and suffering, mental, physical, what it must be like there. We want to alleviate that, as well as anywhere else in the world, Ukraine, so on, all the other pockets of strife in this world. And may all beings be free of suffering and find perfect happiness through what we've done here tonight. Okay, thank you all. I'll be online again for the next couple weeks, back on November 2nd in person again. So everyone take care, be well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.